All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I was looking through the schedule and realizing that we really just don't have a lot of class days left. So we have to we have to kind of move forward quickly, which is important. So today we're actually going to skip over 224. We're going to move to 225 today, and today is your introduction to sections. So the presumption is that the bulk of this. Basically the bulk of what you've created for your exercise and your assignment 205 is virtually done, and we're going to start kind of working with it, manipulating it. The key things that we're going to cover are section cuts, and then how do you create line drawings, plan, section, and elevation as part of your final product, so to speak. So you've spent all this time working to create high quality 3D model. How do we get line drawings out of it so you don't have to redraw it in AutoCAD or Illustrator or something else? So we want to cover those things before the end of the semester. So at this point, your rendering should be kind of finalizing and moving forward. And today I'm going to walk you through kind of the basics of cutting sections. And so we'll cover that. We are also at the point in the semester now where realistically, when you might not be working when it comes to exercises on exactly what the exercise says. So what I will offer to you is that while you're working, say today you work for 2 hours, even if it's not what I'm asking you to do as part of the exercise, turn in something. Just give me a rendering of whatever you're working on and I'll check you off for that exercise. So the exercises are designed as guides to help you finish everything by the end of the semester. But if you end up working on something different, that's okay. I'd rather have you turn something in than ignore it and not turn something in at all. So a couple things that I do want to cover though. We will, of course, talk about sections, and I'll walk you through this whole exercise 225, but I want to remind you yet again of a couple of important things. First off, when you're first logging into your OneDrive, make sure you go into your folder, and in this case, it's my fall of 2022 folder, right click on it and say, always keep on this device. Likewise, I do the same thing for my resources folder here that contains all of my files that I reference, my block references, and that sort of thing as well. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that V-Ray and Rhino are both always kept on this device. That means that everything will be downloaded locally, and when we go to do renderings, we're not going to have lags in the system. So we want all of that down and ready. The other thing that I do, and I've reminded you of this each time, is I go into my folder where I have the caffeine application running, and I make sure that I'm starting the caffeine application. It looks like a little coffee pot down in the lower corner here. Right click on it and say active for 8 hours. I haven't found that the 24 hours really works. I think the 8 hours is pretty good, and that'll keep your computer active and running in case something were to happen. You'll get it back just in case. So I just like to go through those, especially as we start to do the renderings, because that obviously takes a little bit more time. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Rhino now. And it's loading up here. In the meantime, I'll get myself a little bit better organized with my chat windows and stuff. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and we'll dock all of those V-Ray toolbars. Actually, we'll close them off, except for this V-Ray all toolbar. There we go. Oops, put it in the wrong spot there. Stick it down below. That's better. We'll go ahead and make this big, and then I'm going to go ahead and open my master site file. So I'll go to File and then Open, and I'm going to load up that master site file. I did spend some time after class on Monday sorting out what was going wrong when I was trying to do that grass. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and actually, I should have probably opened the grass test, but I'm going to go back through that process because I believe I've solved the problem. And I'll show you that. Sometimes it's the simplest of mistakes that you overlook, and you'll see how simple it was for me to have missed it. All right, so there we are. This was the surface that I wanted to work with the grass on it. And you can actually see the remnants of the grass there. The part that I missed right here, oops, I have to make V-Ray the default renderer. There it is, V-Ray for Rhino. The part that I missed was when I created the V-Ray fur. So remember, it's right here under our V-Ray objects. If I right click on it and I choose fur, I can then edit the properties of the V-Ray fur. There it is. I could call that grass. But what I failed to do is I failed to actually apply it to the surface that I wanted to apply it to. So what I needed to do is I needed to select the surface. Again, don't select the whole surface. I just needed to select the surface and then right click on it and say apply to selection. So I didn't actually apply it. That was the big mistake that I made. So as we come down here, I did my count area at 1. I did my length at 24. So it's a little bit longer of grass. And then down here under material, I went ahead and used the grass material. So I turned that on and then I picked the grass material out of my list. There it was. And that then will work to create the rendering. I'm going to switch this over into the day rendering just so you can see the grass. So I'll go into my V-Ray options here. We'll go to my settings. And I'm going to load my daytime settings. So that we can jump over into the day, just so I can confirm that these are working. So my day settings have loaded. Let's double check my render output. We'll shrink this down a little bit. We don't need it too high for our example here. I have it to automatically save. I'm going to turn that off temporarily. And let's go ahead and do a render. We should see now, the sun is on. I can see it there. We should see now that this grass will start to actually materialize right here. So give it a little bit of time. It looks like I have a problem with my background file, but really right now what I'm concerned with is that the grass is showing. And so you can see it start to materialize here. And that's starting to look far more realistic there. Again, my render quality isn't that high, but you get the idea that this grass is now growing there. So as we look at this rendered view, there are a few other places that I could choose if I wanted to apply some grass. But the key here is that we don't want to over apply it. So for example, I could do a little region of grass right here, and I could create maybe a rectangle, maybe about like that. We'll project it down onto, switch over into the top view, and project that down onto this surface. And then I could use a split command with that. So we could take this surface, we could split it with that object. They're giving me a separate little surface right here. I could then apply that fur to that surface. So we'd go back into my V-Ray asset editor. We'd go back into my V-Ray objects, and we go ahead and apply to selection. We may need to make some adjustments, but it may turn out okay. Now we're going to go back into my set view, and we'll go back into my render one view, which was right here. It looks like I didn't quite cover it to the extent that I needed to. We're looking at what we're seeing here. There's that little bit of surface. I might need to go a little bit higher toward that ridge. But if I were to re-render this, you can see that all I'm trying to do, because this is a little bit more taxing on the computer, is I'm trying just to include the grass where it really matters. So I have it right in the foreground right here, and then I'm putting a little bit here because I can see it. Maybe that's relevant, maybe it's not, but you guys get the idea. That's the part that I wanted to emphasize as part of this rendering. So we'll let that render out a little bit more. Now, what I'm working on, and actually that was the wrong render because I'm showing too much of it. So let's close that. It should have been render 2. That's the much tight. Oops. Oh, maybe I didn't save that render where it was a little bit closer in. So again, we want to orient this So we're cutting off as much as we can. Maybe it's more like that. And then we can do the re-render on it. So let's stop. Let's render it again. That was my mistake for not saving it. You can see the grass showing up here. It looks like I'm going to have to do new settings down here. I can see it. They're just, the distribution isn't right because the area that I'm applying the grass to is significantly larger. So I would need a new fur object back here. I'd create a new fur object. There it is, fur 1. My area count, this is going to be much higher. Let's go to 10. And my length was 24. And my material, we'll toggle that on. It was the grass. And then I want to apply that to the selection. The density should go up on that. And then we could jump back and re-render it again, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more grass in that section. So again, when we add this fur, it obviously takes longer to do the rendering. And so that's something to keep in mind. We can't fur the whole topography because it would end up crashing. So we're being very careful about what it is that we're choosing to do. So with all that being said, we're now going to shift gears into understanding how we might cut a section through a building. And this is something that starts to be really important as you showcase your designs and can be one of the most beautiful pieces of a design presentation because it can really show a lot about your building. So let's talk through how we would go about doing this. Well, first off, what we're doing today with this is we'd end up kind of destroying our object. So I like to open our master site. I'm going to open it again just so that this one in the background can keep kind of working. We can open it as read-only, that's fine, because I'm going to do a save as. And this is really important. Before we perform any section cuts at all, we want to do a save as, because we're going to end up destroying this in the process of creating the section cuts. So let's let it get open. Like that. And then the first thing I'll do is I'll do a file save as. And we'll call this master site ocean dash section. You could call it section 1 if you did multiple sections. And I'll go ahead and click save. So at this point, right, I've created what I want as a separate file. I can destroy this file and it doesn't matter because it was a save as. So I need to think about, where do I want to cut through my building? Right. So as I look at my building, always cutting through the stairs is nice somehow. So I think I might cut through the building that way so that I'm seeing the stairs and this kind of multiple heights. It's a little bit better than cutting through the building on the end like this, because there's just not as much exciting stuff to look at on the end. So what I need to do is I need to create a large vertical plane that's bigger than everything that I might want to cut through. So I'll come over here into my plane tools. And you know what? For right now, let's go ahead and create a new layer. So I'll come over here, I'll create a brand new layer. There it is. I'm gonna call this layer section, or maybe section 01. Oops, sorry, I'm in the middle of a command. I need to escape out of it. There it is, section 01. Now that's the active layer. And so on that layer, I will create a large vertical plane. So there's my vertical plane. I do need to know which way it's going. So let me zoom back in and make sure I'm going the correct direction. Yes. We're going to go outside of everything. And we're going to come back over here. Now, if you're working on the Tahoe site, you don't need to cut the section through the big Tahoe block that includes Lake Tahoe and all the surrounding mountains and whatever. We just need to do it of the site itself. If you're doing it in the ocean setting, you would want it to be large enough to cover the disk that represents the ocean. So at this point, I can take this plane and we want to make sure that it completely covers the object. So right now it's too short, so we need to move it down so that it's covering everything. And then we need to adjust it so that it's actually cutting through the building where we want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and move it. And we'll drop it over here. Now I want to make sure that I'm cutting through my stairs. But I also want to make sure, if I can, that I'm not chopping right through light fixtures. So I want to make sure that I'm outside of that light fixture a little bit. So let's move it just a bit more. You don't have to worry about it, but it's better if we don't cut through that. So that looks pretty good from a section standpoint. That looks like a good place to cut my section. So let's jump back into my perspective view here. And there it is. So before we can actually cut the section, we need to start breaking this model apart a bit. So right now I have my blocks that are all in here. And so I need to make those actual geometry that I can work with. So I'm going to explode my blocks. Now I could come in and I could select the blocks there, and I could type explode, or I can type in SEL block instance. There it is. And it'll select all of the block instances at once. And then I could type explode. And like you can see it making a mess of my layer structure, because remember, this is a destructive process. So I've done the first round of explosions. Let me go in SEL block instance again. I might have nested blocks. One instance was added. Let's go ahead and explode that one. I'll type it again, SEL block instance. No blocks were added to the selection. That's where we want to get. So we keep doing this as many times as it takes for us to get to select block instance. No objects were added to the selection. That means everything's been exploded and are actually live lines. I'm going to switch over into wireframe for just a second so that I can zoom in on my building itself. Zoom selected. There we go. And then we'll switch back into shaded mode. So you can see that our building is now bisected by that big plane. That's where we ultimately want to cut our section. So in order to cut the section, we need to split all of these objects along that plane. So I'm going to go ahead, and again, I'm going to switch back into wireframe mode just to make this a little bit easier to do it. And I'm going to do a split. So I'll type in split. It's going to ask me to select objects to split. At this point, I can actually just select all the objects except for, right? We can select all of those, but we also want to select the terrain. We want to select the ocean. So I've got all the objects there, and we'll go ahead and press enter. Now this split process can take a little bit of time because we have a lot of objects to split. I need to select the cutting plane, that's that big surface, and then we'll let it process. You're going to see some split fails happening. And generally the ones that are split fails are just ones that don't intersect with the plane. So we can just keep processing here. Now, I should point out that there are other ways of creating a section. You can use, the Rhino has a section plane tool, a clipping plane. You can set up a section that way. The problem is it works a lot like SketchUp, where when you do it that way, you'll end up just cutting a hole through your building. So it's great to see temporarily, but we can't study how the light enters your building during the rendering. We're instead left with just a missing half of the building. So the method that I'm teaching right now allows you to preserve the other half of the building. And it will then, even though it's not there during the rendering, it will actually render out as if that other half of the building exists. So I like that as a strategy. This is the clipping plane tool right here, and will allow you to create that clipping plane if you want to. I'll demonstrate that a little bit later, but I'd like to get through the actual section cut here first. So now that I've completed the split, and it's probably easier to see this in one of the side views here, you can see that half the building, and I'm going to select it just for demonstration purposes, half the building right there is split right along that line. And the other half would be on this side of the line. So now it's important to think about what part of the building do you want to keep? Well, in this view, in the right view, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. The part of the building that I want to keep is this half right there. Oops, sorry, I went too far. Is that half right there. Notice that it did select this light because light objects don't get split. Okay, so that's the half that I want to keep. So this other half, we need to work through what's happening over here. as part of this rendering. So let's switch, instead of looking in the right view, let's switch over into the left view. This will make our selection process much easier. We're just flipping the view around. So now we're looking in the left view instead of the right view, which is going to allow us to select all of the objects much easier because we can select from right to left and select everything this touches. So there they all are. I'm going to hold down Shift and make sure I get everything right up to that line. There we go. I've selected everything that it's touching. So all of these objects need to have a special material that's applied to it. And this is a very interesting material. It's not one that can exist in real life, but because we're working with V-Ray, we can create a very specialized material like this that is visually transparent. So we can't see it when we perform the rendering, but it's opaque to light. So I call that type of material a see-through material. And so if we jump back over here, you can see that I do in fact have a tutorial for how you create it, but then I've also given you the see-through VR mat material so that you don't actually have to create it, but you could create it from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and download this material and save it onto my OneDrive. I happen to already have it, but in the interest of doing it, we'll go ahead and right-click on it and say Save Link As. Let me choose to put it in my folder for today. And we'll drop it right here. And I'll go ahead and click Save. And that saved the VR mat. So when we jump back over into V-Ray here, oh, there it is. We want to go ahead and load up that material. So we'd go into our materials. We go ahead and open an asset. And there's that see-through VR mat material right there. If we look at it in preview form, it looks a little funky, and that's to be expected. Okay, so now I want to apply that see-through material to this whole half of my building, but when I do it, I don't want it to apply to wherever the glass is. So at this point, I need to come over to my layers, and I'm going to turn off any layer that has glass on it as a material. So I have to kind of look through it. So right here, let's move this over just a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. Oops. There we go. We can look here. I've got my window glass. So let's go ahead and turn that off. I've got this window glass. We'll turn that off. This is where organization can help. I'm just looking around for any other things that have glass on them. Glass railing. There we go. We need to turn that off. And I think I've covered everything that has glass on it. So they've been turned off. Now I can go into my V-Ray asset editor. I can find the see-through material. I can right click on it and say apply to selection. And that's going to override all the materials that are currently on it, but it's only on this front half of the building. So I've done that to the glass. Now, the glass that is on this side, if I wanted the glass still to be on the rest of the building, I would have to turn these back on. But at that point, I need to make sure that these pieces of glass right here are just a plain transparent material. For our purposes right now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave them off, because in the rendering we don't need to see it. But I guess I should probably show you how to do it. So let's turn these back on, and as I turn them back on, I'm going to right click and say select object layer, or excuse me, select objects. Okay, then I'll come down to my next one. I'll turn it on, and I'm going to select objects. And then I'll turn this one on, and I'm going to right click and say select objects. Perfect. So the objects that I care about, right, are the ones that are on this side. I don't care about all of these objects. So this would be an opportunity to use the control key to deselect. And of course, this is the one option when we're using the remote desktop from a Mac where it's not going to let me do it. So I'm not going to be able to deselect it because it's going to not let me do it. But I would use the control key and then deselect that part of all of these objects right there, because we don't need those. I could manually go in. Let's look at our render here. I'm going to go ahead and switch this into shaded mode. And I'll do this by hand. And essentially what I need to do is I just need to select all the glass. So I can jump my way around here, select all of these pieces of glass right there. And then I can select my windows. And you can get the idea. It's a little bit tedious to do it this way, all because I can't use the control key in our remote desktop. So once I have all of these selected, then I would go up into my materials and I would just create a brand new plain transparent material. So let me go ahead to this little create asset. I'm going to go to materials. We'll do a generic material. I'm going to call this one transparent. Okay. And then right here under the opacity, I take the opacity all the way down. So it's just perfectly transparent. And then I would apply that transparent material to all of the objects. So I'd right click on it and say apply to selection, and then all of the glass would be selected. It looks like I accidentally had the ground selected. That should be on the see-through material. So let's go ahead and change, let's apply the see-through to the ground. And so now that I have this set up, we can do our first kind of preliminary rendering. So let's look at the building right here. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit like that. I'm going to go ahead and load the daytime settings so we can see this a little bit better. So let's go to my settings right there, and we'll go ahead and load the daytime settings. Now, the cool thing is we can do this with a day or a night set of settings. I'm going to change my render output here. We'll drop the size down just so we can see it with a smaller size. We'll turn off the autosave. Then we'll go ahead and render it, and we should start to see what this looks like. I need to sort out why it's providing that reddish tint. Looks like the fur is still being shown, so I'm going to have to turn the fur off, and I need to sort out why that red tint is there. But you can see that it's cutting my building. Now, one of the things that I forgot is that I have this big plane here, and that big plane needs to be turned off. So I can just type in hide, and that's going to make the big plane go away. Let me go back to my V-Ray materials, and let me check my see-through. It looked like I had red applied to it. So let's take that away. We'll go back to just white. I'm not sure why that was there. And the rest of this should all be okay. Let's go ahead and render it. And now, yes, we're seeing the rest of our building being cut. So when I do this, however, right, I'm relying on the walls to appear filled in. And they don't always work exactly as we want. So I may end up creating a little bit more some special objects that'll help fill in where those walls are, right? Some of them are there, but like I have a little bit of an issue there. So, and again, I have to turn the fur off. So let's go ahead and close this. Let's go back into my geometry here, and we'll just go ahead and delete the fur. We don't need it. We'll go ahead and delete it. Fur is gone. And to kind of clean this up, I'm going to go ahead and temporarily hide this whole half of the drawing. So we'll select it all. Oops, I didn't quite get it all. And we'll go ahead and hide that. Now we can kind of see what this section looks like. That's just temporary. And now I can fill in. So I can use my section layer, which is right here as the current layer, and then I could fill in all of these little pieces. So I could come in here with my rectangular plane. Let me turn on my end snap. And I could start to fill in. This is where you see issues with your model. Right, we could repeat this one there too. Oh, come on. Oh, I'm going to switch to ghosted. I didn't quite hide this little piece that needed to be hidden. It's in the way right now. So let me go back to my rectangular plane. And we can fill that piece in. And then we can come over here and I can fill this piece in. Fill this piece in. All the way down to right there. Fill this piece in, there, there. So again, I hate for you guys to watch me do stuff like this because you obviously know how to do it, but you get the idea. Now, on that section 01 layer right here, I would go ahead and assign that a material. And it might be something as simple as just black. And so I probably should have created that material first. Let's go into my V-Ray asset editor. Let's go back into materials and let's create a new generic material. And we can call this generic material black. Or if you wanted your section not to be black, but some other color, you could do that as well. And let's change the color to black. And there it is. And then we want to assign black to that section layer. So let's go to apply to layer, and we're going to put it on the section 01 layer like that. And again, I'm not going through and doing this whole process, but you could fill all of that stuff in. I do want to fill in this, the pool, because well, I probably should trim it out. Oops. But for right now, we'll go ahead and fill it out. Now, it's also possible that you might want to fill in where the terrain is. You can do that by duplicating an edge of the terrain there and there, for example. And then we could just copy it, V for vertical, and we could drop it straight down like that. And then it's just a matter of lofting. So I could take this curve, and we could loft those together. And we could take this curve and we could loft those together. And again, we'd fill in the rest of this section. So we'd come over, see if I can do it quickly here. Let me turn on my perpendicular snap. Like that. We could fill that in. And we've got a little bit more to fill in right here. And anyway, we could keep going and filling in the details. But once we have that part kind of filled in, then we can come back and look at this again. So let's go ahead and type in show to bring back the rest of my objects, except for that big plane. So let's go ahead and hide that big plane again. And then we can do another rendering of this. And remember, the cool part of this is that light is going to be cast into the building as if the rest of this building still exists. Okay, this material, I don't think it got cThru applied to it, so let me make sure that it did. Apply to selection, and then let's go ahead and render again. I'm going to go back into my settings and I'm going to up the quality here a little bit just so that we can see it a bit better, and then we'll render it out. And I'm still missing my sky right now. So you can see this starting to appear. Notice that the shadows are still being cast on the ground. And our lights are still being cast inside, and any daylight that's coming through would also be being cast. I did not turn off those glass layers. That's why we're seeing these little bits of windows. I didn't make all of those transparent. I do need to go back and fix that because we're seeing little artifacts in the front of this section. We can, of course, switch this whole thing over into a night view. So we can go back and switch our rendering over to see it in night view, and we can see how it would look in section form there. So in the interest of being clean, I am going to stop the rendering, and then I'm going to go ahead and select the rest of the glass before we have that kind of interfere with things. Or I could come in here and just turn the glass off altogether, which might be an easier strategy. So let's go ahead and turn that window glass off. Let's go ahead and turn off the glass railing. And let's go ahead and turn off, there was more glass somewhere. There's more glass there. And then we'll come back and do the rendering again. I am struggling because my sky wasn't appearing quite correctly. So I should go in and fix that as well. That would be under my environment settings. Right here, this doesn't appear to have loaded correctly. Let's go ahead and clear it. And let's reload it. I'll go back to my bitmap, and I honestly don't remember which one I was using. Go back here. Let's go to resources, V-Ray, HDRI, and I'm guessing I was using 006. Let's use that. And let's go back here. This should have been on as well. Maybe I just didn't finish doing it. So we'll turn the GI on. Let's go to bitmap and let's load an ENV. And let's double check my camera. It's set at 14. That's pretty good. And these values look off. So I would need to go back to my quick rendering setups. I do need to make a page on Canvas for you guys to see this. Let's go to resources, quick rendering setups. And it was 006 right here. And my background value was 30 and my horizontal rotation was 0.92. Let's make sure that this changes to 30. And this background rotation, rotate H by 0.92. That would also mean that this one needs to be rotated by 0.92. There we go. And so now we can come back and we could re-render it. Go ahead and click on the teapot here. And we'll give it a little time. So our job today is just to learn to create this section and go through the process of creating the section. That's really what we're after. We will use this section down the road when we create our plan view, when we create our section view and our line drawings. But sometimes people just like to create a section like this so that they can perform a sectional rendering, which is kind of a beautiful rendering in and of itself. So you could set up the view similarly and essentially chop off part of your building and see what it looks like. So as I start to let this render out, you can see that we're seeing inside the building. We filled in the parts that are, all of the building items here that we've cut through. And we're getting a good view of what the inside of this building looks like. Okay, so I'm done a little bit early, and that gives you a little bit of extra time. You can see that obviously I got the clouds in the sky now. So we're going the right direction here. And maybe I need to spend a little bit more time tweaking this rendering, but you at least get the idea and you're starting to see this as a section. So our goal today is to create a section, save the JPEG and turn that in. Like I said, if you don't get there, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with not getting there. If you turn in something for me, that would be great, whatever it is. I will point out right here, this is one of the powers of the rendering. That is sunlight streaming through into the building. There's the sunlight right there from the part of the building that we're not seeing. And that's the power of this rendering method when we cut the sections, is that we are actually casting light and shadow into the building, and we're seeing what it would look like during that time of the day. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Wait, Luis said... Okay, Luis, you're saying that the sky always fails to appear when you save the setting and you flip back and forth. If that's the case, it's possible that you don't have the HDRIs fully downloaded on the remote desktop and it's not connecting the links. If not, if they are fully downloaded, then it should connect the links, but we can spend some time in the check-ins today solving that problem as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let you guys start working. I will be here for the remainder of the afternoon to do check-ins and to solve problems. If you haven't checked in with me this week, make sure you come and do a check-in. And from there, I'll let you guys go ahead and go.